So have you ever worked in a series before? Or are you confused about what a series is and how to make your work into a series? Today we'll be talking about not only how to create a series, but also how we can bring things that maybe don't really work together and make them into a series that becomes cohesive and works together as a creative project. If we haven't met yet, my name is Nadine and welcome to Hop Along Studio. So let's get started. So let's first talk about the prints that I show here. So what I did with this is I was looking at creating a little calendar for myself. I had these little Tailored Expressions 2023 mini calendars and I got them in a set of 10 and I was going, okay, well I want to create some calendars, I want to create some stuff. How do I do this? So I've been doing a lot of Gelli plate printing this summer and I did a whole session about how to print leaves. And if you want to see that video, you can see in my description below. And basically I ended up with a lot of these beautiful leaf prints in a variety of colors and textures and looks. And I wanted to create them into a calendar project. So when you're working in a series, usually what helps it become cohesive is you're using similar colors, you're using similar imagery. There's something that ties them all together. So if you're in a gallery and you see a set of paintings by a particular artist, you'll notice that they're using similar imagery, they're using similar color. There's something in them that's tying all of those pieces together. And I was thinking about that as I was creating this project. I was thinking about, well, I literally love these leaves, but a lot of them are different leaves, they're different textures. How can I bring them all together? But then I thought about it and I went, well, the leaves are what makes this a series. And when I was creating these calendars, because the calendars are so small, I wanted to have a focal image, but then I wasn't too sure what to do about this outer edge. So by using that same print, but having a section of it on the outside and having a different section on the inside, that even created more cohesion, more pizzazz to this calendar project. At the end of this video, I'll share with you how to create the right sizes and use the right aspect ratios for getting all of these to fit nicely into a calendar. But first of all, I want to talk about how you can take your Gelli prints, determine which ones would work well in a series, and how to cut them in a way that makes them very interesting for this calendar project. So I did pre-cut a bunch of my pieces from my gel prints that I'm going to be using in this calendar, but I wanted to talk about how I went about this when I was looking at a Gelli print. So I look at this Gelli print and I go, this is a very interesting print. For this calendar, I was looking for 2 3/4 by 3. So it's a fairly small section. So I usually went over and went, well, that could be a really interesting look. But then you have areas like this that are really interesting. They have a nice color, but they're not necessarily as interesting as this main focal image. And that's what I often use for these backgrounds. So I would figure out an area that was 3 3/4 by 5 3/4 that I would basically cut off. And then I would choose another section of it to add and make into the journaling space. If you have a print that you can do it in a portrait view, you can basically create 2 separate sheets out of one print. So if you want to try to add on a lot of similar colors or you like similar textures, this is where being able to have a calendar that maybe has 2 prints that are similar, another 2 prints that are similar, it helps bring that cohesion into your project. And so that's basically how I cut these out. And then for some of my prints, some of them weren't as interesting, so I only used maybe a few of the major sections of it, but I have dozens and dozens and dozens of Gelli prints, so I'm okay with a little bit of waste because anything that I don't use, I can also use in collage and other projects. So for each of these, I figured out basically a background that was a little bit more flat and a foreground that had a lot more texture on it. And I cut these out of my different pieces of paper. But then what you're running into is you'll notice that some of them, I tried to stick with a lot of kind of the blues, purples, and then some of the warmer colors. So these aren't all a perfect match, but that's okay. What I wanted to do was have a blue in one tied to a blue in another, and then that blue is similar to this blue. I could try to find a way to take things that were maybe not totally cohesive and tie them all together. And so you want to cut all of the large pieces, the 3 3/4 by 5 3/4, and your main print is going to be 2 3/4 by 3 inches. So I love these images as they are, and if you love them as they are, just leave them the way they are, mount them, enjoy them, it's great. But I wanted to find a way to bring a little bit more cohesion to this. So what I wanted to do is I wanted every focal image on these prints to be unique, but I did want something that would tie them together. So I have this little arrow stamp, And I also have this cursive stamp. And these ones I'm going to be stamping on all of the backgrounds in different places. And that's a way of bringing cohesion because there's something is the same from print to print to print. And then this is where you need to choose a color or colors that you want to use. I was thinking maybe of using the purple because almost every single one of these ones has either some blue or a little bit of purple. Like even these ones here have a tiny bit of purple. And the purple will also be a little bit contrasting to some of these backgrounds. And I'm also going to be using this Orchid Pastel chalk ink. It is a little bit more chalky feel to it. So it's going to work a little bit better for trying to add in some of these images and have them stick out from the background. So for example, I'll do these one by one. You have to decide which side of the print. And for me, I usually try to choose an area that doesn't have a lot of color to it. And so you can see that adds in like just a fun little bit of color there. Then I'm going to go in with my little stamp. I'm going to try it in this deeper purple. It might not be the right choice, but we're going to give this a try. I find with every single one of these, you need to make a decision about the colors that you want, and it might take a little bit to figure out which combination works the best. So that's fairly subtle. You kind of lose that in this particular pattern. So I'm going to try to go in with some fluid chalk ink in this Blue Lagoon color. I'm going to try again and see if I can get that to stand out a little bit more. And that's a little bit better. This one's a little bit of a hard one for the arrow stamp just because there's already so much strong color in it. But I still want to add that image to every single one. And I'm just going to continue to do this on every single image. So they can be a little bit more subtle. They can be a little bit more brilliant depending on the look that you're looking for. I'm actually going to sneak a piece of paper underneath here because I'm stamping so much. I want to make a little less of a mess here on my background just to make cleaning time a little bit easier. I'm going to add again a little bit of that blue. So that sticks out a little bit better. You can see that little bit of that mark there. Just add something really nice to the project. And because this flourish is working quite well, I'm going to add it to the darker areas and then add the arrow to the lighter ones. And that way, that arrow, which sometimes gets a little bit lost, won't get lost so much in the design. And with that one, that got lost. So now I'm going to go back in with the purple archival and try again. And that should stick out a bit more. And so you can see that by just playing around with the colors that you're using, with the design that you're using, you can go back and forth. You don't have to do them all in purple. So for example, this one here, because it's so purple, I do not want to go in with purple. Instead, I'm going to go with some of the blue. And I know chalk inks aren't as popular as they used to be, but there are still a few places that do carry them. I particularly like them for stamping on these types of projects. In this case, I'm going with the purple, but I'm going to go over top of that other color, and it does fall away, but sometimes it doesn't always have to be the most brilliant thing, because we're going to be adding in focal images. This is just another area of color that we're adding before we're adding in our main color to the background. What I've done is create a little bit more cohesion. You'll notice the same stamped images. You see some of the same colors. Now instead of everything looking like they have different colors, now there's a few colors, that blue and that purple, to start tying things in together. And now I want to add in a focal image, but I don't want the same image on all of my calendar pieces because honestly, that's not very interesting. So I'm using black archival ink for adding the imagery with the stamps. That's another way I'm going to tie it together. They all have the same color of ink, even if they don't have the same imagery. And so I like looking at these one by one and trying to decide which image would look best on which background. So I have this really fun balloon stamp, and I'm going to add it to this very light one because I think that detail of that stamp with all the other details is going to look really nice together. Then you might have ones that are a lot busier. For example, this one here. So this one I'm going to add in this dragonfly stamp. So the dragonfly itself has a more strong shape, which makes it a really good choice for adding to that image. And this is another one that's very, very busy. So I'm going to add in a grove of trees. And I'm going to add it in actually more than once. So because that has a lot of contrast, it's going to stick out nicely on that background. So you get the concept. You basically go image by image, take a look at what you have, figure out what maybe would look really good with a particular stamp, add that stamped image, and then move on to your next image. So if you've enjoyed what you've seen so far, click that like button. Every time you hit that like button, that just helps share this video with more people, and I so appreciate the support. So you'll see that a couple of these I actually used some glitter embossing powder. It's a gold tinsel embossing powder from Ranger, and I added the embossing powder on top of the stamping. The reason for that is they were falling really far to the background. You couldn't really decipher the images. You could also use acrylic paint for this. Any sort of wet acrylic paint would really help them pop from the background. But I wanted to add a couple gold ones, and I thought that was kind of fun. So a little bit of gold on this one with the tree and these ones here. And I think it adds a little bit of variation. It doesn't necessarily pull away from what I'm already doing, but it helps bring a little bit of an interesting feel to this project. And so now what you want to do is choose which months have which images. So for example, February, I'm definitely going to have the heart. The holly is going to be December. This is probably going to be sometime in fall because it has the fall leaves on it. So you just want to take a little bit of time to figure out which month you want for which focal image. So let's talk about creating our calendar backs. We start with our 4" by 6" piece of white cardstock. Then we add in a 5 3/4 by 3 3/4 piece of pattern paper. Then on top of that, we'll be adding our 5 1/4 by 3 1/4 piece of black. That's going to give you a 1/4 inch border. So we go from an 1/8 inch border to a 1/4 inch border to the black piece. And then this is where we want to play around with adding in our main print and our January section here. So what I tend to do with these ones is they're a little bit of a finicky thing to figure out the exact spacing. So what I do is I usually put the January piece down, and then I usually adjust this. So sometimes what I end up with is a bigger frame around the outside, and these are butted fairly closely together, but I'm fine with that. I would prefer to have a more even border on the outside. And so you could use a wet glue for this, but if you are using a wet glue, you need to use a very heavy cardstock. I did this with the wet glue and a thin cardstock and ran into them buckling and warping, and you could see the glue through it. Because I am using some thinner cardstock that I have around that I really want to use up, I'm basically just adding in a little bit of the dry adhesive. The one I'm using is a scrapbook adhesives strip, and I will put all of the links to all the supplies below. And then basically I'm just assembling this. And I have to give credit to this calendar idea to my friend Carlo Youngworth. I originally saw a sample that she had done with a calendar using some scrapbooking paper. And I thought, well, that could be really fun for using with Gelli Prints. But definitely the original idea came from a sample that she did. So I really do need to do a shout out to her to say thank you for the inspiration. But I wanted to bring it a little bit further, play around with the Gelli Prints, play around with the idea of a series, and see what we could create. And so basically this is how we're going to be creating the little calendars for every month. So here are the finished calendar pages, and when you add them with the black and the white, you can see it has a much better contrast, especially with those background pieces that you've added. So a few of these turned out better than others. The leaves here are really nice and black. This one's a little bit soft, but I was okay with that. And again, this is where you need to find that balance between light and dark and how deep of images you want and how much you want to show through. Some of these are a little bit softer. This one here, because I didn't want to pull out my paint, I ended up using embossing powder with it. And the embossing can also look really nice on these. It does take a little bit longer to do, but I really love that on the dark colors. It looks really fantastic. Well, ones like this that are more detailed, sometimes they get lost a little bit, but they can also work out really well. And so that's a calendar that I've done for you today. But then I wanted to show you another one that I had done that was all with embossing. And with this one, it can be good and bad. Like on the dark colors, the embossing works really well. On some of these other ones, it doesn't work quite as well. And you can see, for example, on this one, the color didn't work quite as well. You can still see it, but it does kind of fade away. It isn't as contrasting. So sometimes it's trying to find that balance. It's figuring out how to create things as a series and still have a really good focal image. And this is where I really like doing them just with leaves and other things and creating your more vibrant Gelli prints. But I also want to show you what you could do with them to create them in a series. And this one, you can see it's pretty warped. I used the art glitter glue with it. And the reason it warped is the paper was fairly thin. if you're not using 110-pound paper at a minimum for everything, you're going to find there's going to be some warping. So what do you do with these when you have them done? You can pin them up, but you can also find yourself some of these tablet holders. They're just made of wood. I'm going to decoupage this one at some point, so you can set it up and place your calendar on it. And then this way, I ended up every month, I'm just going to pull one off and move it to the back. And this way I can keep my whole calendar together, but it gives me a monthly calendar. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and this is showing you some different ways you can work in a series. This is a little bit more unconventional way to work in a series. Usually you're just sticking with trees or one subject matter or one set of colors. This was more about how you can take things that are not cohesive and make them a little bit more cohesive and make them have a little bit more of that sense of series in them. And I thought the calendar was a fun one, just because with the calendar, you do want some variation, but you also want some things that kind of pull things together. So I hope this is giving you some ideas on how you can use Gelli Prints and the idea of a series in your creative projects. So if you've enjoyed this video, if you could like it, subscribe, and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on any future videos. And if you've enjoyed this video, click here. This is a video that I did on using pan pastels with Gelli Prints and how you can incorporate them into an art journal page. So I'll see you in that next video.